Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another indie book review. One I should have posted literally months ago. You may remember, if you watched my Why I'm Leaving BookTube video, that I still had a couple authors who I had accepted before the switch to the blog, and I gave them the option of getting a video or not. And some of them said yes, and I was like, okay, that's fine. And I finished this book, and I reviewed it, did the video, and the audio was screwed up. So I was like, okay, I'll redo it later. But then I forgot, and the holidays happened, because my brain has really enjoyed actually not having to record a bunch of stuff. Writing the posts is just so much easier. I'm sorry to say it. I'm pretty sure I am solid in my switch, but I do still owe this video review. So we are going to be reviewing The Shrouded Throne by Stephen D. Jackson. This is a YA high fantasy all about an attempted assassination of an elderly stateswoman and the young mage that saves her, and they end up in this big political conflict where a hidden antagonist is trying to get at the mages and wipe them all out. Years and years before in the history of this book, they used to have a king-like figure called the Eschelarch. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce that, basically a king. But they removed him and just kept the rest of the political system, literally putting a purple shroud on his throne, hence the title. I love it when the fancy fantasy title makes sense. But also in their history, there was this big genocide of mages, the magic users, because it was deemed that they were too powerful in doing dark magic and all of that stuff. But there's also a lot of intrigue of, well, were they actually doing that dark stuff, or is that just bias because history is written by the victor type thing? And there's a lot of good intrigue in that. We had 3 mage characters. I had to look back in the review to remind myself, and we have the overachiever, as I called her, the sad boy that needs someone to tell him he's proud, and the lover boy with a secret. And the secret is that he's gay. This book does have some queer themes. The author originally told me that they were ancillary to the plot, his quote, but I call bull because the idea that you have a marginalized group of people who have been tormented in the past, the mages, being targeted by a religious sect. Yeah, nope. That's just a queer analogy. And it's even more on the nose because there are queer characters in there, and the religious sect is also being terrible to them. So that tracks. But in general, I always get a little nervous with high fantasies just because the world building can so easily get overwhelming and overly complicated. But I did enjoy how all of this supposedly ancient news, or at least a couple generations old news, was still relevant to the plot. It wasn't just a bunch of history put in for the sake of history. And I really enjoyed especially the magic system in this one. It's very much soft magic, very much based on emotions. Mages in this day and age are actually required to limit all their emotions. There's a lot of jokes about how mages are some of the most boring people alive because of how neutral they have to be all the time. But our young mage protagonists are not neutral. They are very dramatic and emotional, a la teenagers, and the magic responds very strangely in that way. But I liked the ambiance, the aesthetics of the magic system, and the way that when their magic is turned on, they literally view the world differently. The world kind of dims and they can see the magic as bright white sparkling lines and that kind of thing. So I liked that aspect, and it wasn't too confusing a magic system to follow. I do wish there had been a little bit more consequence to certain plot decisions. Sophine, specifically, our overachiever friend, she does, we can call them morally gray. Some of them are downright awful, but others of them are morally gray things, and she doesn't seem to have a lot of consequences for it. There's not even a lot of threat of consequences, to be honest, and what that there is doesn't seem to come up a lot. I wish there was a little bit more yeah, I get why you did that, but that's still an iffy thing, and there really should still be more people looking into that, because she never really has to face like someone else in the book ends up getting like low-key framed for what she did, but she herself never has to face it. So I wish there would have been a little bit more with that. I was surprised that this was a standalone. I genuinely thought it was the first in a series because the antagonist was just built up so gigantically. It's not a series, but there was honestly times where I was like, oh, okay, we're coming up on the cliffhanger now. And then it kept going. And that being said, it did feel like it was wrapped up a little too neatly, a little too quickly, which is kind of the problem when you do big political, like, world-consuming plots. Once you've established that there's a whole gigantic problem among the entire populace, it is really hard to make a satisfying ending without at least another book. I will say, speaking of whole systemic problems, I do like how a big theme of the book is that it wasn't just enough to remove their dude in power. Like I mentioned before, when they removed the King dude, when they removed him, they kept the entire system under him in place. And they kept the Senate and everything else. They never actually tried to change the way things were run more than just remove the one dude. And they're still having problems. It's still not working. And so when there becomes a new threat and someone else wants to take up the throne again, there's really just an open seat for them to walk back into. And I like the idea of it's not just enough. It was never just the one guy causing all the problems. You needed to change the system at the ground level to change it. And I think it is important to note, I believe this book was written around 2016, which you can definitely see it. You can definitely see it a lot in the way that it discusses politics. And I do occasionally like the big political books. Apparently I don't like when it's nobility. I realized that reading this book, where I don't tend to like a lot of the big political intrigue stuff in high fantasy, but only because they tend to be like bloodline in nature, and I don't care about that stuff. So having it be more political and that kind of aspect without bloodlines, I mean, they are still all kind of nobility, but it's not a given that your offspring are automatically going to take up your place if you lose your Senate seat. It can be overtaken from you other ways. So I really liked that aspect. Our Senate woman who almost gets assassinated did read as older. I did like that we had an elderly woman as a major character in this. I don't know that I wholly believed in the found family element, because it was supposed to be like she viewed these three mages as kind of like her de facto grandchildren, I guess, based on the sheer age disparity. But I don't know. I didn't vibe. I feel like again, I expected this to be a series, and I don't know why I never look up that stuff when I get a review book. I just go with it without. Well, actually, I take that back. I do know why. I don't want to be spoiled. I want to go into it as new as possible, but this is still a very good book for people who like high fantasy, but maybe not the densest high fantasy. It is YA. I think it read quickly. I believe so. Like, not like super quickly, but like it did read like it was meant for a younger age demographic than me, and I am 30, so YA is not meant for me. And I like that. That is actually more accessible for teenagers. Again, we have some queer themes that I really liked in there. We had some nice twists and turns and intrigues. And is that person really the antagonist? Who is our greater antagonist? I just wish that it had been drawn out a little bit more. The more I go into this, the more I read, the more I realize I like longer and longer books. But I do low-key wish this had at least been in duology, and that we had given the full extent of the problem some breathing room to really let the tension settle. But there were a lot of nice tense scenes. There were a lot of nice rug pull moments. I highly enjoyed it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And if you're on the lookout for some queer YA high fantasy, I would highly suggest it. Now, as I mentioned before, I am not accepting any new review requests for video reviews. I have moved to a blog will be down in the description. I am still doing reviews on there. I've already posted several because, again, this was a little late coming. I do also have a couple other video reviews that I need to do for people who sent their books before I made the switch, so don't be surprised if you see my face a couple more times. But aside from that, I don't have any really hard plans to come back. It's just so much simpler and so much less stress to keep a blog than anything else, and the idea of having to go back to this full filming and having to make sure I look a certain way and feel a certain way enough to be animated on camera is just, it's not there. Maybe later, maybe I'll throw up a couple of videos over the course of the year, but for right now, I'm happy with the blog. Thank you so much for watching, and with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.